Welcome to Get Wisdom Live with Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. What if God was also a co-host? What if the historically rare ability to question God directly and get profound answers back has been rediscovered? What would God say to today's sophisticated but deeply troubled world? Get Wisdom Live is here to share those answers with you. Here is Carl Mollison and Brian Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Get Wisdom Live. I'm Brian Kelly, along with Get Wisdom founder and director, Carl Mollison. This week, Creator discusses the black arts. And that is a dark topic, absolutely. Based on most of the questions derived from a book called The Black Arts by an author named Richard Cavendish. I kind of want to point out, though, that as dark as it is, the show itself, I don't think, is quite as dark as maybe the first impression leaves. You know, this is, at the end of the day, a study of consciousness. And so there's some takeaways from this exploration that I think are very valuable, Carl.
Well, I hope so. And, this isn't exactly a fun topic for anyone, but it's intriguing. It has its fascination. And I guarantee you, it's not unimportant. And it's not going out of our way to focus on something weird and bizarre and distasteful for no good purpose. People are using these tools and techniques as we speak all around the world to cause harm to other human beings. So some of these things need to get on the table for discussion and out in the open so we can shed some light on it and and really bring to bear divine solutions. That's what we're all about. So we can't help it that these things are existing and hurting people, but we can do something about it. So that's why we're here.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get right started. You asked Creator, the questions for this episode are derived from the book The Black Arts by Richard Cavendish. He writes, the driving force behind black magic is hunger for power. Carried to its furthest extremes, the black magician's ambition is to wield supreme power over the entire universe, to make himself a god. What is Creator's perspective?
All right. This is what Creator tells us. This is what I channeled. This is quite telling because it is showing quite clearly that the absolute extension of the power of the black magician, so called, is the antithesis of the divine, an opposite energy and intention to have total power for itself. And that implies taking power away from everyone and everything else, the divine included. This is always a slippery slope to honor the self too greatly compared to others, let alone the divine. It is typically a pitfall of the ego to seek ever greater power. In actuality, that is a reaction to an inner fear, an inner insecurity that one is somehow vulnerable and lacks something it needs to acquire. That uncertainty, and at times feeling inferior to others who are perceived as having greater power or authority, spurs on the mind of the magician to seek a redress for what is perceived as unfair status. In a loving universe, power and privilege are earned and, in fact, granted to you by others based on your merit, your stature, your degree of divine alignment, and all that entails, including morality, ethics, character, and wisdom. It will be true and evident to all that any would be unitary power will fall short because the very notion and desire of being an ultimate authority and source of power is a selfish act by a being deeply flawed to not realize their own limits and inadequacies and therefore not in divine alignment. The desire for power is an impulse arising from a recognition of the self being somehow incomplete and is therefore a diagnostic indicator of a flawed being.
Well, that certainly comports with my understanding of things. The idea that, evil basically, I think, operates from a fundamental platform of a perception that that they are being slighted by God, that the universe is unfair, their status is unfair, their role is unfair, and that they're trying to outdo that, get around it, find a workaround, find a back door to right the wrong, right, to even the playing field. And it's basically an inability, an unwillingness to come to grips with reality, Carl. I think at the end of the day.
Well, I would agree. The interesting thing about divinity is that it is the concentration of power, the greatest of power. But if you want to have some benefit from it, you have to do a little bit of work. You have to take some kind of action. It isn't just handed to you, like
Right.
Creator was saying. This is a meritocratic universe. You advance by your own accomplishments, judgment, insight, and wisdom, and not just because you show up and you want to have authority and an influence over something and feel important. So the thing about God is it will leave you alone
Yeah.
if you use that. So all you have to do is ignore the divine and it will be totally silent. It will not play a role in your life unless maybe someone prays for you. This is interesting, in terms of power. A tyrant who builds a fortress, has their army always surrounding them, and so they have that reassurance and things ready to hand if there's some kind of a threat or an attack. But God will disappear,
Yeah.
and that's easy to arrange, and it's hard to get back because once you give it up, it lowers you,
Yeah.
and then it's an uphill climb to restore that relationship, but it can be done.
Yeah. Well, that's the karmic baggage that they end up building for themselves, and that
Yes.
literally weighs them down. Right. It's the karma of their own creation, their own monster that
Yeah,
ends up consuming them.
yeah, black magic is an attempt to get back what people have given up
Yeah. Yeah.
by moving away from divine alignment. And
But
it's
they
a poor
ironically,
substitute. It's not that it's impotent, but it's not an equal substitute.
no, no, it enables some short term game at an incredibly long term expense. They're just really digging a bigger hole for themselves in the end. Ah, U.S. creator Cavendish writes, an exceptionally gifted and powerful magician may be able to kill by the sheer force of concentrated hatred, especially if his victim is someone of unusual sensitivity. What can creator tell us?
Grader says, unfortunately, it is true that someone who is adept in the black arts can exert influence over another and with enough focused intention will be assisted by the darkness in adding greater power to that intention. Either singly or in combination with a larger dark agenda, this can have dire consequences, especially with someone who is ill prepared to defend themselves, having been undermined and become weak. And that limited power to help the self can be the undoing of a person who may be overwhelmed by the onslaught of negativity sent their way. So, individuals who are exceptionally vulnerable and weak and become quite fragile can be easy prey and even killed by a practitioner of black magic. This is only because the darkness is an aggregate force of many, many individual beings. And when they lend their energy to a dark intention, it can be a force to reckon with. The thing to keep in mind always is that the light outweighs the darkness and always will. So it is the absence of light that creates a vulnerability to begin with, and then things proceed from there. When there is an opening, a void through self neglect, self criticism, or a weakening from victimization. In a weakened state, there will be a void that the darkness can fill and take over a person and reduce them further. At some point, the consciousness of a person may well choose to leave, and then death of the body will ensue. That is always a hollow victory because it will never give a lasting reward to the darkness. And this is in keeping with its very nature in being a downward trajectory, a downward spiral, a lessening of divinity through an aggregate of dark intentions. Even though they might be growing in strength and power, seemingly, that negativity will be their undoing. It is only a matter of time. This will always be so.
Yeah, and I think logically you can see that it will always be this way because their power is destructive almost entirely. And we've heard about the interlopers who've destroyed thousands of worlds in this galaxy already. And will they stop? If we don't turn this around and heal them, the inevitable result is that they're going to end up destroying their own nest. You know, and at the end of the day, they're going to make the galaxy itself uninhabitable. You know, so I mean,
Well, we're beset by these kinds of problems at all levels. I have a client who is being attacked through black magic done by a warlock and his coven. Now,
yeah,
this is in middle America. I mean, this mid America. This is not some exotic weirdness in one of the undeveloped countries. And it's focused in a way that it is sending dark spirits to torment this person and cause physical pain that is
sure.
unrelenting. Think about that. No kind of medical intervention or psychological intervention will do a thing to help such a person. There needs
Right.
to be a divine campaign to bring healing for those wrongdoers. Not that it's easy either. And this is the problem. All these things are happening, and there's no easy answer in the mainstream view of anything.
Well, it's
We
completely
need
diabolical.
divinity to be restored.
Yeah, it's completely diabolical because the mainstream doesn't even recognize it as a problem. Right? It's just dismissed as lunacy, essentially. But the
Yes.
problem is very real. So they're operating without oversight, essentially. The mainstream is not any kind of correction whatsoever. So these occultists have a free reign, essentially, except for prayer and divine intervention. I mean, that's really the only thing that can oppose them right there.
Yeah. And it truly is a kind of criminality because the intentions are evil and really a transgression
Yeah,
on personal sovereignty.
absolutely. And we have learned that you know not just deeds are recorded in the Akashic records and constitute a karmic penalty, but your intentions are also recorded in the Akashic records and are used to calculate the karmic penalty by whatever algorithm karma uses. So it gets back to that saying from Jesus, that you could commit adultery with your thoughts. So yeah, it's wrong on both accounts. You're doing something in the physical world that's harmful, but you're also your own thoughts, your
Yes.
hate that you're using to impel
Yeah.
the
And you
evil
see
act.
that on television every day with
Yeah,
people arguing, people hating each other, name calling, attempts to undermine others with smear tactics and so on. Those are a form of psychic attacks. And so
yeah,
ordinary people all the time are sending out a kind of black magic attack against others around them because of their thoughts.
yeah,
And not that they have the power to kill, but it will have an impact to
oh
some
sure.
degree.
Yeah, and maybe it could kill if the victim is weak enough,
Well, it
under
will
last.
certainly undermine the person having the dark thoughts. And that's
Yeah,
another thing to keep in mind here.
absolutely. Cavendish writes, modern occultism brings the notion of the astral corpse. When a man dies, his body remains on Earth, but in his body of light, a replica of the earthly body made of finer and subtler material, he goes to the astral plane upon death. His soul eventually mounts to still higher planes, leaving the astral body as an astral corpse. Just as the earthly body retains enough innate life force to grow its nails and hair for a time after death, the astral corpse retains a faint spark of life. It has an intense desire to live again and can be attracted back into the normal world either consciously by necromancy or sometimes unconsciously. It could then absorb enough life force energy from living creatures to prolong its shadowy existence almost indefinitely. Some occultists believe that spiritualist seances really summon not spirits, but astral corpses. Before I say, what can Creator tell us, of course, is now the question, but I wanted to point out that I'd actually read this book like a couple decades ago, Carl, and these questions came from notes that I have. And I had forgotten this whole concept of astral corpse. I was only reintroduced to the whole idea of it when I was putting the show together. So interesting. It's an interesting idea, nevertheless. But we're going to find out what Creator thinks of it.
All right. Well, this is what Creator tells us. This is a misconception that arose from a state of confusion in not discerning the difference between a human spirit residing within the lower astral plane and a lower order spirit being one of the dark fallen angelics you call spirit meddlers. These spirits will not announce their pedigree and so are easily confused among others that are simply experiencing a lowered vibration, making them primitive and sometimes hostile and in a corrupted state, and they will resemble the spirit meddlers in their ability to cause trouble for the living. Once a spirit leaves the body, it is essentially the energy of consciousness in a transitional state, and as a function of vibration, will be compatible or incompatible with the environment it inhabits, depending on location and whether there is a state of impairment holding that spirit back from being able to journey to the light and complete a transition fully with a return home to the heavenly realm. On first emerging, the vibration is of a lower nature because the person has been spending time as a physical being, and their consciousness will have the lower vibration of physicality. Once freed from the body, there will be more flexibility, but there must be an intention held by that consciousness for a higher vibration to come about in order to traverse the higher levels of the astral realm. That will not necessarily happen spontaneously, depending on the state of mind of the emerging spirit. Some transition quite quickly, particularly when in life they're adjusted to the idea it is time to leave the physical and return home, and there is a strong expectation they will be met by divine beings and that all will be well. But if in a state of fear, uncertainty, or confusion due to illness or mental aberrations, the emerging spirit, in being disoriented, will have a lower vibration and may well have difficulty transitioning further. These trapped earthbound spirits are encountered by psychic mediums and then will be representing a lower order of consciousness that is clearly dysfunctional. And this leaves room for many theories and speculation about the meaning of it all and the origins. Spirits do not have their normal memory bank any longer because that was tied to the physical body via the brain connections. When the body dies, the consciousness is set free, but may well be disconnected from the life experience. And there will be an impairment of memory and even awareness that death occurred in many cases. Spirits trapped in the lower astral plane that are human will often have soul yearnings of one kind or another. This provides a kind of agenda and a restlessness, making them seek a safe harbor of some kind, and they will often interact with humans to whatever extent they're capable to get their attention simply by wanting a sense of companionship as a normal human attribute. But this will have to be experienced intuitively rather than through the normal physical senses of sight, hearing, touch, and so on. Spirits are not necessarily well equipped to do that. And this can lead to a worsening of things with despair, discouragement, and a decline in wherewithal to deal with their dilemma. When such spirits are connected to by psychics, they will often get the merest outlines of the human being they truly represent. It is very much akin to someone attempting to interact with a stroke victim who has had a severe neurological damage. As such, victims may not be able to communicate at all or remember who they are. and may lack the ability to see and recognize others, and so on. So, this is a complex picture with many, many variations, but little true understanding of the dynamics. And that has naturally led to false assumptions and categorization of phenomena based more on conjecture than true understanding.
What a fascinating answer. Creator pointing out here that these spirits that are basically stuck in limbo, you could look at them as like a stroke victim. That is just a brilliant analogy, and I think that explains an awful lot, Carl.
Well, it's puzzling to people. If mom has passed away, where might she be? And if she's stuck, how could that happen? Because
Right.
they think of her as mom and that woman who had her wits about her, hopefully, and had a lot of understanding of life and had reached that level of maturity and wisdom and so on. But you get cut off from that. And that this is a profound insight. The dilemma of death, at first at least, in making that transition. So you reconnect with prior knowledge in the higher astral plane. That is when you really get back to normal.
Right. Yeah. No, it's we part of the project, the underlying goal of Get Wisdom is to educate people about the hazards of being stuck in limbo, and that 1 out of 3 people who die don't make it to the light and need a rescue. So this is helping to shed light on that, and it's a fascinating answer. U.S. creator
Yes.
Cavendish writes, magic depends heavily on mimicry. When a magician musters the full power of his will and acts in a certain way, he believes that he causes the forces of the universe outside him to act in the same way. This is an extension of the rule as above, so below, or so as below, so above. As the magician behaves below, so will the forces of the universe behave above. At least that's the thinking, anyway. What is Creator's perspective?
Creator says this is a general assumption that can reflect reality as far as it goes, but only up to a certain point. When someone is engaging in black magic, it will be because they are not in divine alignment. And in that state of being, will not be able to partner with the divine. And so will have only their own energies to work with. The only other place energy from the universe can arise is from the forces of darkness, answering the call of a black magician, wanting something to happen and seeking a greater empowerment to bring it about. So if they are below and seeking help from above, it is only the smallest of differences between the physical state and the lower astral plane, as it will be the dark spirit meddlers who answer the call and may well use the intentions of a black magic practitioner to join forces and effect a kind of amplification. They can, in a sense, piggyback onto dark intentions launched by black magicians and use that as a kind of carrier wave to take advantage of it being targeted for a particular agenda. And because of the nature of black magic, it will be an agenda that suits the spirit meddlers just fine because they are working against the divine, against love and light, and will cooperate readily with a dark agenda that causes something bad to happen. It is how they themselves think, and there will always be a reward in it for them because along the way they can siphon off some energy for themselves to keep going. And this is a requisite because they are not supported with life force energy by the divine any longer, having outworn their welcome through their dark deeds and are now cut off entirely, living as strict parasites, subsisting only through stealing energy from other living things to keep going. So the fact a black magician can enlist help from the universe is not because they are connecting with someone lofty. They are only tapping into the energy of fellow dark beings and taking advantage of a resonance from sources of consciousness who are similarly maladjusted and corrupt in being out of divine alignment.
This answer reminds me of the Emperor in Star Wars. Um, it's kind of I think a perception, a widely held perception for the most part, that people that get into black magic become ugly, right? They lose their their magnetism, their attractiveness, right? They become ugly, and that's what happened to the Emperor in Star Wars as well. And we know how that happens now because when you do black magic, you have to align yourself with dark forces, and they're going to borrow some of your energy as well as the energy of your victims to maintain themselves. And as time goes on, you end up getting drained yourself and having all the power taken away from you at the end. So it's a it's a dark picture, Carl.
Well, again, the good analogy is the criminal realm, that when someone becomes a criminal and hangs out with other criminals, that can be a risky environment to them to be
Yeah,
in.
absolutely.
If you're spending time in a den of thieves, watch your back.
Yeah,
They'll turn on you at some point because they're sociopaths and worths. They are totally selfish. That's how they turn to criminality. They have no conscience, no compassion. And so you are always at risk around such people. And becoming that way yourself is a road to a dark ending that could mean your dissolution as energy and the
yeah,
loss of
yes.
your soul.
Eventually, that's what we're told. Yeah. Um, you know, we mentioned a couple questions ago. It was that it was implied that really the only answer to this problem, because we're not going to be able to have an answer from the medical community or the psychological community, is divine response, divine intervention. And the only way to get that is through prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol. So take this time right now to download our prayer book, getwisdom.com/prayer, and also get our ebook on the Lightworker Healing Protocol. You can download that at getwisdom.com/LHP. Carl, U.S. creator, in a recent show on Superstitions, creator said, the widespread practice of putting salt at locations, at the borders around a location, as in the four corners of a room, of a home, to create a kind of sanctuary, might be self reassuring as a ritual, but that is only a self soothing gesture and not a significant deterrent in any way to spirits and what they can do. Now, I've noted that creators' use of the word significance is noted because that implies the salt might have some properties that are at least disagreeable to dark spirits. It might not prevent them from entering and exiting, but they might find it distasteful. That was the curiosity here. Cavendish writes, all devils are supposed to detest salt, and no salt should be used in ceremonies designed to attract them. Salt is anti demonic because it is a preservative. Demons are creatures which corrupt and destroy. Anything that has preservative qualities, including spices in addition to salt, is contrary to their nature and disagreeable to them. So, while perhaps not a hard deterrent, do dark spirits find salt and spices to be disagreeable to them? What can Creator tell us, Carl?
Okay, these ideas are commonplace among the spiritual community. This is what Creator says. All such notions are entirely superstitious in nature and origin both. These are ideas implanted by the darkness into living humans to create a kind of folly, to trick them into doing something that is useless and will, in effect, get a kind of game going where people will try one nostrum and then another, then increase the variety and amounts of the presumed magic substance that can protect them. And that can even reach absurd proportions in a desperate attempt to ward off evil. All the while, they are being mocked and laughed at by the dark forces who set that false idea going by implanting it in the minds of humans. This was done by extraterrestrial interlopers as a kind of cosmic joke and amusement to watch humans flail about and struggle with their fears and deceive them, to give them false answers and useless tools, to then enjoy the consequences of the desperate attempts for self protection that go nowhere and in many ways are counterproductive because spirits know full well, in seeing the trappings of attempted self protection, there are people at that location living in fear of them, and they will join the game as well to go after those human beings with relish, seeing them as already weakened through fear and ignorant as well about their true helplessness. So, in addition to being worthless as remedies, such practices can make things worse by telegraphing a state of fear and perceived vulnerability that will always attract the bullies.
I have to say that's probably an answer that is 180 degrees away from what practitioners of black magic would believe, right? Because it's a common practice, to like create a magic circle and then to put a salt ring around you and maybe even draw a pentagram in salt and stand in the middle of it with the idea that that's going to create some kind of energetic barrier that the demons cannot penetrate. And but Creator's telling us that that's not the case, and if it looks like it works, it's only because the interlopers are play acting to go along with the charade. You know.
Well, the other one that people use a lot, and you hear it described many times, is smudging,
Yes.
where you take a bunch of sage and set it on fire so it exudes smoke, and then you go around smudging a room, letting that smoke spread into the corners and so on, where spirits might hang out or what have you. And all that does is hurt your lungs. It doesn't do anything to spirits. They're completely impervious to anything in the physical like that.
Right. Right.
And it's superstition and a folly because it telegraphs that you're worrying about them, and they love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it does. It does make some people a living, though, Carl. We can't keep that in mind.
Well, it's a feel good exercise, and we'll give it that much.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. U.S. creator Cavendish writes about the law of return. The law of return is a principle that the force of a spell which fails rebounds on the head of the sorcerer. What of a dark spell that succeeds? Why do black magicians believe that successful, harmful spells avoid the law of return? Quite the conundrum, Carl. What can Creator tell us?
Creator says, this is a clever propaganda message used to manipulate human thinking and encourage practitioners of the dark arts to maximize their diligence and work at encouraging and work at developing their power, with the threat of failure coming back to haunt them as an incentive to do their utmost in serving dark agendas. The need for adjusting or readjusting methods and strategies may become apparent with a failed black magic attack, for example, if the law of karma creates a backlash for that practitioner. The law of karma is a divine instrument that, in effect, polices the universe through giving a consequence for human or other beings through their actions, good or bad. Both kinds of energies will be noted, recorded, and projected into the future and will circle back to the originator with rewards in the case of positive influences on the universe and with a punishment of some kind, or a loss will happen that punishes a perpetrator engaged in wrongdoing. That eventuality has been noted. In past eras, it has just as often been through an intended victim, having established a divine partnership through regular prayer practice and a strong belief in the divine so as to render black magic impotent. And moreover, those individuals with a good intuitive sense may well perceive they are being attacked in some way and may well be able to see intuitively who their attacker might be and then arrange some kind of exposure or comeuppance for their assailant, hence giving rise to the notion, if you're going to do it, you'd better do it right, or you might have to pay the piper. But the true mechanisms are not understood by practitioners of black magic. When they fail, it is often because they are going up against the divine. And when they succeed, it is only because their victim is not aware of that safe haven available to them and believe in it. And therefore, the black magic succeeds by default, because in effect, their human target has dropped their guard and made themselves vulnerable. So the success of black magic is not truly derived from great power, but the fact people surrender their native power as a consequence of their divine origins. And this will make them vulnerable to the workings of a lesser being because they have chosen to be defenseless in the face of any would be attacker seeking to manipulate and overpower them.
Again, this is a fascinating answer. And creators coming out and saying, when black magicians often fail, it's because they're going up against the divine. But it's an opportunity to point out that divine intervention is going to be coupled with the amount of prayer intention that has already been launched for protection of that individual or whatever the divine realm is being looked to protect. So if there's not enough prayer intention to give enough protection, then you might end up with a half measure, so to speak, right? There's some fallout, some evil that's done, but maybe not as bad as it could have been. So it's a partial success instead of complete failure on part of both the magician and the divine realm.
Yes.
U.S. creator Cavendish writes, in magical theory, the name of a thing is a miniature image of it, which can be used as a substitute for the thing itself. Cavendish further writes, in the Bible, the angel who visited Manoah, that father of Samson, refused to reveal his name. Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? The angel wrestled with Jacob also to tell him his name, presumably because he thought Jacob could use it to defeat him. Cavendish further writes, in Jewish tradition still frequently observed, a child should never be named for a relative who is alive because the relative will die if his name is taken for the child. What is Creator's perspective?
Creator tells us these cultural traditions have arisen because of real phenomena regarding identity and the fact that it confers a potential risk from would be attackers who can use a name to focus their attack most precisely. Hence the need for confidentiality. So, an intention to strike back or add to the defenses when a certain being is near may not be mounted in time because there will only be uncertainty and not a way to identify who is friend or foe. Consciousness has its power through intention, and that is what focuses it and launches it forth and directs it to a target. It is all based on intention. There must be enough specificity for intention to be focused effectively to address an individual recipient for whatever purpose there might be. Consciousness is not so different than modern technology that is a way of directing a conscious intention through technological means to make a connection. This is why to use a telephone to reach someone, you need to know their number, and without it, the phone is useless. To reach a person with non local conscious intention, for good or for ill, you need something linked to that person to focus the intention. So, a stranger who does not identify themselves can come and go with relative impunity, except in the case of eyewitnesses or victims who are present and were able to have a perception in consciousness of that being, and that they and they alone can use to connect to them from a distance if they know how. But another person simply hearing there was a stranger present for a time will have a more difficult task to go after that being and reach them with certainty to, for example, carry out a reprisal. So it is the nature of the physics involved here that the need for specificity was recognized along the way, with names becoming a powerful label that could be referenced intuitively and serve dark aims as well as lofty ones. The idea of naming a child after someone in the living being a danger is a carryover from familiarity with the fact that naming and knowledge of names provides a means of bringing harm to bear and is therefore risky. To do so will not truly jinx them or hex them. As a practical matter, there is the issue of people who will be unsure about who is being referred to, simply hearing a name discussed about a family member. But that is not a true danger, only an inconvenience. So traditions are traditions for a variety of reasons and not matters of life and death necessarily.
Well, I have to note, Carl, that we are two-thirds through our program, and this is the first time where Creator has kind of, come out and suggested that, well, the black magicians might actually have it right on this one. That there is something indeed powerful about names, that it is a function of consciousness, it's a function of intention, and that it has a viable reality and can be used for either dark or lofty aims.
Yeah. Well, you need to name your intended victim. If you're hiring a hitman, I mean, I
Right.
learned this from television. This isn't from my crime ring that I picked up this little bit of practical savvy, but this is just common sense. It's just logical that you need a handle somehow. There are other ways to do it, and one of the common things practitioners of the dark arts use is to secret through theft a personal belonging of someone they want to work on and send dark intentions and dark energy and dark attackers to torment.
Yeah.
So if they have something belonging to you, that energetic link to you that it will contain can be a pathway to
Yeah.
send an attack forth. So this is physical analogy to connect you to you in some surreptitious way to make something bad happen.
And that's why it's a very important element of the Lightworker healing protocol to ask the divine realm to break any kind of energetic connection that might exist in articles that once belonged to a victim or potential victim.
Yes.
Because so that's a very, very important aspect, and creates another opportunity for us to invite and perhaps even implore you, the listener, to check out the Lightworker Healing Protocol. Again, download the ebook, getwisdom.com/LHP, as well as visit our website, getwisdom.com, and check out the healing tab on the main menu, where you have an opportunity to learn more about the protocol as well as enlist a practitioner so you can have someone do it for you and provide healing for yourself and loved ones, Carl.
Yeah, this is the answer. And there needs to be a groundswell movement of people coming back to God and embracing empowered prayer, learning to pray in ways that are really effective and for the things most needed. And then learn how to heal or hire healers to carry out healing in a high level fashion that's effective and employs the divine realm to do their thing. And they have profound ways to heal humans have never thought of.
Yeah, absolutely. U.S. creator Cavendish writes, Numerology is simply an extended study of vibration, and the numbers from 1 to 9 make a complete cycle of vibration. The numerologist universe is like a gigantic musical instrument which has innumerable strings. That's a lot to contemplate. What is creator's perspective?
Creator says this is indeed a useful analogy because music is mathematical. The reason certain musical tones and the intervals separating them have a particular pleasantness to the ear is because mathematically they are in an ordered arrangement in a hierarchy. The ability to perceive it as having a kind of sensory experience that, if done with skill, gives rise to pleasure is a gift from the divine to make mathematics come alive, in a sense, at least in that setting, symbolically, so that mathematics can be enjoyed in an abstract way and as a visceral experience because it is coming through the senses, not as an idea, but experienced by the physical body and a delight to the mind. This shows that the field of mathematics is not simply a human intellectual invention that is largely separate from reality and more a potential amusement, like constructing a puzzle that is only an abstraction but has a definition and a physical analog that can be manipulated and will follow certain rules and predictable characteristics and so on, but is nothing but an invention of the mind. Mathematics is much deeper. It is a representation of foundational principles that order the universe in certain ways and correspond to energies of various kinds. There are a vast array of such energies, and these can be depicted numerically through mathematics to ponder their interrelationships and make predictions about their effects simply from the mathematics in the architecture alone. This is difficult to explain and comprehend as a generality, as there are countless examples of things throughout the universe that have a mathematical description that will be quite meaningful and allow a deep understanding and many predictions about possibilities strictly from that architectural feature. And this is why the practice of numerology can lead to useful insight if it is based on mathematical reality and not some corrupted thinking in the mix as well. That often happens with truisms of all kinds, moral, philosophical, and scientific. But what we are conveying here is that there is a risk always of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. To disparage something like numerology based on a superficial representation of what it is and what it can convey, when there are true and deeper mathematical interrelationships that lend themselves quite nicely to such representation as using an abstract mathematical language to define and describe and predict their characteristics.
Well, I have to confess, math is is definitely not my forte, and I think at times that part of the dumbing down that the interlopers have done to humanity is, render math especially difficult for most people. Actually, it's really hard for a lot of people to really grasp the deeper mathematics.
Well,
I
and
was in
there's a
school.
reason for that. It's
Yeah,
not that it is not human in its essence, so it's kind of like oil and water and something beyond our capabilities. It's a deliberate orchestration
yeah,
through the school system
yeah.
to fail to teach mathematics because the interlopers know how powerful and useful it is to be
Oh,
adept in mathematical operations and
absolutely,
constructs.
absolutely. And it seems that my own observation is the people that I've run into in my life who are especially gifted in math, unfortunately, turn out to be atheists more often than not. So that's another kind of corruption, right? It's interesting. And I had a guy I lived with when I was in college in the same apartment building, and he was getting his PhD in physics, Carl. And one night I was over there having a beer with him, and he had this formula spread out on a table, about 20 pieces of paper, all spread out in a pattern. And I looked at that and I said, what is that? He goes, it's a formula. I said, how many formulas? Just one formula. Just, my whole mind went boing. Couldn't even begin to comprehend it, but it was typical stuff for him. So some people can get it, Carl.
Well, it can be viewed abstractly. It's the same with anything.
Yeah,
I mean, you can look at nature and see a completely different picture than another person.
yeah, that's true.
And there are examples galore about that. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder is a very deep truism.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we're not all the same, even though we're down here and we're corrupted. But we go back to the light. We're not the same up there either. There's going to be light beings that are more adept at music, for instance, than other light beings. So it's not ubiquitous. Uniqueness is a function of the universe, as below and above. I think we can confidently say that, and it's all for the good. U.S. creator Cavendish writes, "The sin which cuts man off from God is not any form of moral backsliding, but ignorance." What is creator's perspective?
Creator says this is a somewhat glib and incomplete statement, but is logical and correct as far as it goes, meaning that in the big picture sense, no moral backsliding would occur if everyone had a complete understanding of the universe and how it works, because wrongdoing would be unthinkable. Knowing that the Almighty is within each person and aware of everything they think and do. And moreover, there is an oversight mechanism through the law of karma that will bring about a reckoning for anyone committing a transgression of any kind that is an offense even to the self, let alone others. Because all have a sacred duty for the safekeeping of their soul, and to compromise their morality will be a transgression noted by the law of karma and goes against the divine nature of the being, let alone the standards of the divine realm watching over things. So, in the sense that a transgressor is making a mistake, there might be a full awareness or a partial one only. That it is an offense against their divinity as well as what the divine realm represents. But the ability to ignore that reality and give it little or no importance will, in fact, only be possible from a state of ignorance about the inevitable consequences. People will transgress at times if they believe they can get away with it, but will not do so if they are certain of receiving punishment, even if delayed.
Yeah, I think this whole idea of that there's freedom from moral backsliding, and that ignorance is actually that knowledge is actually the foundation of all power, and that knowledge is amoral, right? It's neutral. It doesn't care whether it's used for good or evil. Um, that's not really true. What Creator's saying here, and that if you really had knowledge, you would know that you're not going to get away with it. And we've learned from Creator that only in this universe, the Milky Way galaxy, is karma delayed. And so I guess what Creator's essentially saying here is that black magicians can only really exist in this galaxy because the comeuppance is much too immediate in the rest of the universe. So um, it's interesting that this is where they're allowed to get away with it, but they really lack the wisdom to see the bigger picture is the tragedy of the whole thing.
Well, and to coin a phrase, this is an S-hole galaxy, unfortunately. This is where all dark and evil resides.
Yeah,
This is it. This is our playground slash cesspool, however you want to look at it. I didn't make up that definition. That was said to me by someone in the light, talking
yeah,
about coming back here, coming back to the cesspool. That was Marilyn Monroe. So
yeah, yeah.
it's really true.
It is. It is. Well, we're here to solve the problem of evil, and evil is dirty and ugly. So
And ignorance keeps it going.
it does. U.S. creator Cavendish wrote, "The planets do not doom you to failure or unhappiness, and once you know your deficiencies, you can try to correct them." Can Creator share with us how empowered prayer and the Lightworker healing protocol are the very best means to correcting our deficiencies?
Creator says this is an important realization. It needs to be a primary goal of everyone and how to conduct their life and what to aim for with the personal journey and building towards something so it is not all about immediate needs, the creature comforts, security, having ways to get ahead and gain ground and hold one's own at least, if not outcompete others. There are larger intentions for you being behind your creation and the experiment underway to have you, as creator's boots on the ground, so to speak, work to solve the problem of evil within the physical plane for the greater good of all, everywhere. This changes everything because, by definition, there are needs, challenges, and goals that transcend the meaning and value of any individual human life. But that is a function of the human perspective that is always comparing and evaluating things based on size, quantity, and moral considerations, and so on. The reality is, you are part of a vast human family, but no less important than any other member. And indeed, your success or failure may well determine the success or failure of the whole of humanity, as the latter is a function of the actions of the individuals. And who is to say when the balance of things might tip one way or the other because of what you do personally or do not do? What this all points to is that working on inadequacies, shortcomings, difficulties, constraints, states of lack or suffering are worthy goals, not only for helping the self, but raising up the whole, inevitably, because you all depend on one another and your fates will intertwine. There is a lofty goal the divine wants to see you achieve, no less than to save and heal humanity through healing the interlopers who are subjugating you and holding you back. Much harm is caused in the process, and that is why so many humans are in a state of disarray and dissolution and degradation. It is not their true nature, but a state of corruption brought about through the workings of the interlopers to cause harm through innumerable ways by corrupting thinking and manipulating institutions to be faulty. On and on it goes through all of society to hold humanity back, and now ultimately see to your destruction through a final act of genocide. This defines things in the harshest and clearest possible fashion, that we are not just talking about the difference between a life of ease and grace versus the rough and tumble of people having rough edges and perhaps being selfish, with some true criminals in the mix who will take advantage and cause suffering. What is at stake is the survival of your species, and the consequences will be dire for the entire galaxy and the universe as well, because the experiment to widen free will and free agency will have failed, and this will set things back mightily. What is needed is healing to get things back on track. The only way to stand up to the forces of darkness allied against you is through the divine realm. You must know how to partner with the divine realm effectively. And to do that, you will need to be in good enough shape to stand strong and have a high belief quotient, both in the divine and within yourselves. Few people have a sufficient belief in either at this point in time. It is because of wounding through the ages again and again in multiple lifetimes that ended badly through famine, war, diseases, and an excess buildup of negative karmic trauma, taking a toll on the body to shorten the lifespan. All of those events and consequences add up and will compound the damage, making each new incarnation more difficult. Now that the interlopers have decided to be done with you and are ramping up for this final solution within the next few years, there is no time to waste to apply yourselves to the healing sorely needed. The first order of business is to help persuade the interlopers to leave, but not take that lethal parting shot first, but rather have a kind of a vacation, a timeout interval, and then reconsider whether there are advantages in letting humanity keep going. If that can be arranged, this will provide enough time, in all likelihood, for humanity to heal enough to ascend and escape the physical plane altogether, at which point you will no longer be at risk from these interlopers. This is doable if enough people use empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol, because empowered prayer builds divine partnership for any purpose that is specified. And the Lightworker Healing Protocol has built in specificity and understanding of the dynamics of negativity and the consequences it brings about, along with enough awareness of how the divine realm brings about healing to invoke the highest and best means to address each and every source of negativity causing problems for human beings, to drag them down individually and collectively. You can use these tools, and if at first imperfectly, using these tools will build the skills you need to become champions. But you must start to work, embrace them, and learn as you go. This is safe to do. It only needs you to take some time in the privacy of your own minds to follow the templates established by your channel to carry out the steps involved in making high level informed requests of the divine for what is needed. And that almost anyone can do effectively. It will grow your faith in the bargain. That will toughen you, and the benefits personally will be significant as well. And this will strengthen the value of your efforts overall. This is how you can win the day and achieve your destiny as rescuers and become healers of the universe. That distinction will hold for all of time as the greatest of achievements, But the choice is up to you in whether to take part or be at the mercy of the whims of others when your energy may well be needed to make the difference.
Indeed, it's time for people to step up and actually do something. You know, what I've said, we don't necessarily need an awakening as much as we need a revival, Carl. We need people to take action. And it's one thing to, become aware of all the dichotomies and all the inconsistencies and all the problems that we're plagued with, But just awareness, but sitting on a couch with a cup of tea and watching it all unfold in front of you is not changing anything. We need people to get involved, to learn about using empowered prayer and the Lightworker Healing Protocol. Get the prayer book, getwisdom.com/prayer. Get the LHP book, getwisdom.com/LHP. We need people to get involved, Carl.
Yes, there's been so many false promises, and the spiritual community in particular is targeted with disinformation
Yeah,
to think the ascension is coming. It's almost here, and there's nothing they need to do except ride the wave. That is a total disempowerment because it will not happen unless there's more healing. We've been told this directly. It couldn't be clearer.
yeah,
So, this is mission critical for all humans to participate in raising up the darkness through their actions to align with and partner with the divine. That's
absolutely.
a simple idea, but it's powerful.
Absolutely. That's all we have for this week's Get Wisdom Live. Thanks, Carl.
Be well.